Good morning, everyone. This is a special day in the history of our university, and hope everyone is ready to have a full day of activities as we have our investiture later on today. And, certainly the weather is cooperating, which is nice. I think it'll be a special outdoor ceremony. We have our committee meetings today, and first on the agenda is our Finance and Budget Committee, and I think they have quite a bit of information they want to share with us today and talk about. So with that, Regent Johnson, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Philip. And I'll let you begin.
I'm standing and I'm going to let our folks that are handling the first agenda item come up. Let me introduce Randy McGill, I believe Associate Athletic Director for this services. He prepared our first report that you'll accept, which is the agreed upon procedures relating to NCAA compliance. And Brad Shelley. And Brad is Senior Manager with Crow Horwood. So these are two individuals that know the insides and outsides of this report, and I'll let them give you some brief overview and answer your questions.
All right. And before we begin, I think probably according to proper procedure, this is the first action item, FB1, in the materials that were sent out previously. And from the committee, I'll ask if there is a motion for the acceptance of the NCAA agreed upon procedures report for the year ended June 30, 2017.
So moved.
Second. I have a motion from Regent Higdon and a second from Regent McKinley. Any discussions, or I'll turn it over to you and let you start, and the committee can.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. Glad to be here. As Ann mentioned, my name is Brad Shelley with Kroll Horwath. We are the independent auditors for the university, so providing the audit of the financial statements and then some other reports. And one of the other reports we do is the independent accountants report, which is an agreed upon procedures report, which I believe we have. This is a report that we do every year, required by the NCAA to be done annually for all Division I universities. And so it's just going through procedures that they have outlined, looking at both the revenues and expenses. So I won't spend a lot of time going through this, but please do, if you have questions, stop me and I'll try to answer those the best I can. On pages 2 and 3 are the schedule of revenue and expenses. Again, this is for the year ended June 30, 2017. So this past fiscal year. Page 2 is the revenues. Page 3 is the expenses. And this is, again, according to the NCAA guidelines, listing out all your revenues by the major sports, and then your expenses on page 3. So that's the schedule that we're looking at, and that's the schedule that all the procedures are based on. We do have a number of procedures. As I mentioned, these are all required by the NCAA. There are 48 procedures related to revenue, 65 procedures related to expenses, and about 15 additional procedures. Happy to report that very little exceptions noted. So going through the many pages here, I'm not going to read through all these procedures. Most of them do say no exceptions noted, or the procedure was not applicable. Just a couple of exceptions were noted in here, and those were not significant either. So on page 11, on procedure 44 related to revenue, we just noted that there were a couple of transactions that were classified differently. Still classified as revenue, but just classified on a different line, so no real effect there. It's something that we noted throughout our testing. And then on page 20, the first additional procedure, which was looking at the financial reporting system and looking at the NCAA membership database. So it's comparing financial aid to what is reported by to the NCAA. And we noticed some differences there that I think in talking with management, believe those to be just timing differences in what was reported on one student by the NCAA versus in the financial aid office. So again, noting those differences there, but we did not consider those to be material or significant. Those are the only two exceptions that we noted throughout all the procedures. So happy to answer any other questions anybody has.
I don't have a specific question, but I'll turn it over to somebody. Jason, any questions? Ready? David. Question. Anybody else? Not me. House.
I have a couple questions. And so my first question is, I'm looking at page 24. So I'm wondering, between this year and the prior year, obviously there has been some reclassification taking place, involving quite a large amount of dollars. And I wonder, so my first question is, can you elaborate on what that exactly is? And then the second question is, the student fees you reported do not agree with the student fees we report. Okay, it's basically not even close. So just to give you an example, we disclosed that our athletic fee is $218 per semester. And obviously, 9,200 something students would raise the revenue you disclose here as a student fee, and our enrollment is much higher. So why is there this discrepancy?
The student fees as collected are split 2/3 and 1/3. 2/3 actually come to athletics. So when you look at the budgeted number, this year it has to be $6,024,000. We actually receive, and within our operating working papers, 2/3 of that $6 million, roughly $4 million. That's what actually comes to us. The remainder of that goes towards some debt service that we have, which is captured in a different line item on this report. The debt service for Devil Marina.
Okay. What's the reason for doing it this way?
That predates me.
Okay.
The way it has been done since I've been here for the last 2 years. So.
But it is misleading. I mean, there's no question about it.
I'm not sure that if he just explained where it is and how it's broken down, I can't see where that's misleading.
Well, when we disclose on our fact page that our revenue from student fees to athletics should be 50% higher than listed in this report, that is misleading. Sorry. Somebody looking at these numbers.
But if it has an audit trail and it is explained, if it goes to debt service, and debt services has to be classified in a different way due to the uniform chart of accounts, that isn't misleading. That's transparent.
That may be your opinion, yes.
Well, I think we need to be cautious about how we accuse someone of doing something. Saying something is misleading is an accusation.
Okay, I withdraw that statement.
Let me just clarify, the line is student fees. It's not categorized as the athletic fee in its entirety. So what's reported is the amount that is direct support collected through athletics. The remaining student fee, in fact, is recorded from a different perspective in our financial reports, different from NCAA. And the rest of the mandatory athletic fee is shown, but it is also in this process aligned as if it is university central money that supports the lease payment where the lease is. So it's split. I'm not sure that NCAA has, much like our financial reports, we have 12 to 15 notes that are clarifying points. I'm not sure the NCAA even allows us to have footnotes to the agreed upon procedures.
So this report is basically for the NCAA and not necessarily for all University of Kent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
And just to clarify, it matches what the NCAA procedures require. I mean, that's your role, is it not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're only looking at what the NCAA requires. And again, we're looking at that audit trail to see that you've collected student fees of X amount, and that the portion is 2/3 of it is going here, the other third is going to debt service.
So would it be fair to say in no way are we trying to mislead anyone?
I would think that's fair to say.
Thank you very much.
John, I apologize. I skipped over here. I didn't mean to.
That's okay. Meaning that I'm on the committee.
Yes, I'm sorry, because all the committee members are here, so I apologize.
Thank you, John.
Anything else regarding these procedures?
The question about this reclassification has not been addressed.
Question about what?
So, for example, here we report the direct institutional report rose from 9.7 million to 13.4 million. And there got to be a reason for changing a number that drastically.
And finally, this is kind of a misleading line item. If you refer back to page 2 and page 3, on page 2, the revenue side of the revenue statement, you'll notice that in the non-program specific, there are several lines. I'll start with the NCAA distribution, conference distributions, program novelty parking, and so forth sales. Those are all received at the department level and not reported or not received at a team specific level. So when we actually, the department, receive revenue in this way, the report requires every team to be balanced and so forth. So when you follow that down through on page 3, the very bottom line of total operating expense, excess, deficiency, and so forth, to get that number to 0, the transfer back comes from that revenue. So that being discussed, the direct institutional support for athletics really is financial aid and benefits, payroll benefits, the $9 million. Past practice has been to attempt to allocate student fees down per sport. As I worked through this and spoke with the auditor, we felt that this was an inaccurate reporting for student fees. You're concerned about how much we collected and so forth. We collect that at the department level, not the football, basketballs, and so forth. So we reported this year the student fees as a department level revenue, as compared to years past allocating it to the football team and so forth. We felt that that was inaccurate. So in doing so this year, that's what has inflated or appeared to inflate the direct institutional support on the direct revenue side. The offset to that is the negative or the reduction of $3 million for the allocation from department revenues to the teams. There was no transfer from athletics to the university. The transfer was from the athletics on this report only to the football team, basketball teams, and so forth. If you look year over year, the direct institutional support that athletics did receive, it's roughly within $480,000. And that's why. It's a direct result of increased labor costs and increased financial aid costs. It's just a recording.
So your anticipation would be in the future, this would be more consistent?
This would be very consistent going forward.
Thank you.
Anything further? Hearing nothing, I'll ask committee members who are in favor of the motion to signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries FB1. We'll now go to FB2. Thank you. I appreciate it very much. Go to FD2, which is the acceptance of the third quarter statement revenues and expenditures. Procedurally again, I'll ask for a motion to approve action item FD number 2. Jason, motion second. Second. David, second. Andy?
Yes, sir. So you have the revenue and expenditures as of the end of March 2018. In comparison to a year ago, we're tracking reasonably close to what you would expect. The only differences are pointed out in budgetary implications, where consistent with previous reports to the board, we anticipate that the central tuition accrued from fall and spring is still coming in at approximately $3.9 million off the budget. We expect that to vary now at this point, and which accounts for 2.4% of the budgeted fall and spring revenue. We have the ability to cover this shortfall from carry forward, and as you'll hear in presentations coming up in May, we have identified ways to balance our budget moving forward as it relates to the current year's shortfall. What I should have added under the budgetary implications was that the state has in fact cut our funding by $746,500, 1%, and that did show up in third quarter. And again, that amount is covered by unallocated carry forward. May I answer any questions? Yes.
Look, Andy, excuse me. Let me. I have to proceed. I want to ask. Hold that thought, okay, please. And I'll start with John this time since I excluded. John, you have a question? Ready? Andy, I'm sorry.
So what accounts for the $3.9 million cut? Is it simply decrease your pay?
Exactly. We have decline in enrollment for fall and spring compared to budget. We did budget for a shortfall, but we about 2% off of budget on that one.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. Yes. Just
Yeah.
one. So, and I'm glad you added it. We did budget for a shortfall. We just didn't budget.
We budgeted about $4.5 million. However, that wasn't the final number either. So, little crystal ball, trying to figure out what students are going to do, and we're going to be even more conservative going into FY19.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a little quick clarification.
Yes,
I'm sorry, I was about half listening. I read the numbers, but you just said that we had budgeted 4.5 and we were short 9. That's not a gross of 13 million. 9 and 4.
Yes.
It's 13 million.
I'm sorry. We're talking about $4 million short here over the budget. We reduced the budget about 4.5, so it's about 9.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify.
The combination of the two.
So the 2 is 9 million, not 9 plus the 4.
No.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Klaus?
When I looked at this on page F3, I first sort of was a little confused about the first column, says revised budget third quarter. I was wondering if in future reports that could be changed because it is the revised annual budget,
Right.
and not the third quarter budget.
We'll make that change. Yeah, I think that's been pointed out, and we missed this one. It is in fact our annual budget that has been revised this month, but we don't budget by quarter.
What is the percent shortfall that we might be looking for next year, especially with the change in admission standards? Can you reference being conservative?
I don't have that readily available, but okay. I will in May.
All right, thank you.
So I'd rather not
Oh, I understand.
throw out a number and come back and say, we have calculated it, and I'll come back to you in May.
Thank you.
Anything further? Hearing nothing, I'll ask the committee members in favor of the motion to signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carried unanimously, so it's FB number 2. And we go to the last action item, FB number 3, which is our approval of personnel actions. This has been presented to everybody last week for the meeting. It appears on various pages, F1 through F12 and S1 through S9 relating to the staff. So I will entertain a motion for approval of personnel actions.
So moved.
Ready? Second. David. Again.
All I have to point out on this one, that consistent with what you read, we're pleased to bring the promotion and tenure recommendations forward for your approval.
I'll start with the committee. David, anything? Jason? Good. John? Anybody else? Hearing no other questions or comments, I will ask committee members in favor of this motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. That's all the action items we have on this committee meeting. We now have some informational items, and we'll start with resource allocation management and planning, new budget model.
Looking around for our HEROI consultant. Please don't tell me I'm doing this presentation. I knew you wouldn't let me down. I told him what time to be here, and we were rocking and rolling. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to sing for you, and that will be really scary. All right, so our first presentation, we'll have a couple today, the resource allocation management and planning, which we have used the acronym of RAM. The HEROI consultants contract started in January. The steering committee has been meeting. It's been an intense process, very important process. However, we're probably, I don't know if I want to say halfway there, maybe a little more than halfway there. I'll add that yesterday we met with a joint meeting of the Budget Council and the University Senate Finance and Budget Committee. There's other stakeholder meetings that are occurring, and it's very important that the campus feel engaged in this process and understand how this will impact future decisions at what level. There's a lot to be done, but what we wanted to do today is to allow the board to get into a little more detail as to how this is being developed without getting too far down into the weeds. One reason we're not presenting the model is that we're still engaging the deans. We need to engage new provost, a handful of new deans. So this is definitely work in progress. So Matt Smith is here today with HEROI Consulting Project Director, and I'm going to let him walk you through this overview of the model.
And while we're getting ready here, let me reemphasize something I think you referred to. This is the 30,000 foot view. And it's intended to provide the board and committee members with who Huron is, what our goal is, how they're going about accomplishing it, not necessarily the details.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the board about resource allocation management and planning. As Ann said, my name is Matt Smith. I'm a director at Huron Consulting Group. I've been with Huron for about 6 years in their strategy and operations group, primarily focused on budget and finance related engagements at a number of universities around the country, both private, public, large and small. So just appreciate the opportunity to speak to you a little bit about budgeting as a whole as it relates to kind of colleges and universities. I understand that I have about 15 minutes to speak, and so I've broken my presentation into two components. The first of which kind of talks up front about just some industry trends in terms of colleges and schools and how they're thinking about allocating resources across the campus. And then from there, I'll transition and talk a bit about the project specifically at WKU, some of the guiding principles, timelines, objectives, things like that. So with that,
First thing we need to do, they're working on technology.
I'm glad somebody's.
He's working on it.
oh, well, there we
That was a
go.
quick presentation.
It works. That was a great presentation.
Any questions?
All right, so as I indicated, the first piece I'll just talk a little bit about this kind of overview of the industry. So this slide speaks to just some of the recent trends within budgeting. A number of institutions have recently decided to undertake a redesign of their budget models, in large part to find long-term solutions to recent financial challenges. And so we talk about how institutions are working diligently to reframe the way they think about budgeting, oftentimes as a way to develop new revenues, to promote certain types of behaviors, to funnel resources to strategic priorities. The second bullet then speaks to, this is a recent survey that was done just a few years back by Inside Higher Ed. It found that nearly half of U.S. institutions had changed their budget model in the past 4 years. And for those that hadn't, about a third plan to do so. Of those, nearly a quarter have transitioned to what's called responsibility-centered management. It's a form of incentive-based budgeting. It's kind of a more decentralized approach where you provide more incentives kind of for local units amongst the academic teams and research units and the like. Third point here, the recent changes have often resulted in more inclusive strategies. So broader stakeholder groups are involved in the budgeting process, so it makes for a more robust annual planning process throughout the year. It's really an attempt to better integrate academic planning with financial management. With this inclusiveness, universities have often required investment in data analytics and reporting, particularly in those budget models that use certain type of metrics like credit hours or student head counts or things and the like to kind of allocate certain resources. Ultimately, universities are adopting kind of hybrid models where they're kind of cherry picking different aspects of different models in order to customize a model that's unique to their institution's particular culture, values, strengths, and so on. This next slide just provides kind of an overview and illustrates the fact that an increasing number of institutions have chosen to redesign their budget model, particularly those since the Great Recession, as more fiscal pressures have been placed upon universities, particularly public universities, as it relates to support campus operations. And so you see that line there that kind of indicates the Great Recession and kind of a significant uptick there post 2009 in terms of universities redesigning their models. The vast majority of these institutions have gone towards some form of decentralized incentive-based budgeting, kind of moving away from a cost-focused kind of approach to budgeting and more that incents teams to be able to identify new opportunities to grow revenues through more research, establishing new academic programs, growing existing ones, etc. This next slide just kind of speaks to some of the benefits of effective resource allocation, some of the reasons that those institutions we looked at on the prior slide are moving towards incentive-based budgeting. The first point here is that it facilitates two-way discussions. So as I mentioned before, kind of a more robust annual planning process. Oftentimes that involves academic affairs and financial management working together at the outset of the fiscal year and then having regular conversations throughout. That's a pretty stark contrast to kind of more centralized kind of command and control budget models where most of the budget activity happens in just a few months kind of leading up to the beginning of the new fiscal year. Second point here is we talk about how effective resource allocation translates strategic goals into management and operating plans. So goals are realized in part by allocating resources to promote certain behaviors that help to achieve those strategic goals. We often find that policies and procedures are reevaluated to ensure that they're aligned with where the institution wants to go and its evolving mission and strategic priorities. The fourth point here is improves the effectiveness of incentives with the potential to create win-win opportunities across an entire institution. So a budget model by itself does not create or destroy wealth, but the hope is to put in place a set of parameters and incentives such that over the long haul, there's an opportunity to grow the pie as it relates to new revenue streams and in part that all kind of campus units can benefit. This next point down talks about identifies the true nature of internal subsidies. The economic reality of colleges and universities is such that there's levels of kind of cross subsidization that happen throughout campus. There are certain things that happen on campus that are core to the mission of the institution, core to the WKU student experience that by their nature are not self-funding. So there's a need for central investment to invest in those things that make WKU what it is. And then finally, we talk about, in large part, a move towards effective resource allocation as a move away from incremental budgeting, which really fails to evaluate basic budget allocations. This incremental budgeting type of approach is a historical model whereby the budgets that campus units receive oftentimes is based on decisions that maybe were made decades ago and in large part oftentimes kind of lost to history. And so with this move towards more decentralized budgeting, you're trying to kind of better capture the current economics of the university and set a different set of behaviors moving forward.
I want to make a comment too. This is really good, important stuff, and it takes longer than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
This is worth our time listening to. So.
Well, this is it's new information to some, myself included, and then it's pretty understood to others. However, in your experience, this, if I remember, was a term of phantom knowledge we really don't understand. When you talk about focusing resources to areas that do not have an immediate impact or can be categorized in a certain area, well, how do you use a metric around that to determine that phantom benefit? For example, if we get, our debate team, our forensics team, national award winner, how do we know that that gets national recognition? And we all know that happens. And we can delegate more resources because that's not a self-funding. I mean, we're not charging tickets.
That's right.
We can't audit a ticket trail to go into that. But that's a very big expense. Those students fly to various places. Someone would say, oh, that's a luxury to be able to fly to Tulsa to debate against Harvard or someone. But how do you put a metric against something like that? Because that transcends the entire university.
Right.
So how can we effectively do that without criticism? Yeah. That's the other thing is.
That's a great point. I mean, there are, and this inherent in a lot of these incentive-based models is there's a central steering mechanism that leadership can kind of make some of those investments, given the reality that you can't have a model that just outlines all resources based on metrics alone, such that you have kind of this a market-driven approach that does not kind of place value again at things that are not by their nature self-funding. So I think a good example is a couple of weeks ago, I was working at a public institution, a flagship, that has a school of music, and the university is incredibly proud of the school of music. It's a real proud university, but schools of music tend to be fairly costly structures because you have a tenured professor and he or she may be teaching just 3 or 4 students. That's pedagogically kind of sound, but that's an expensive endeavor. But the university values it greatly, and so as a result, makes kind of central investment into that school of music such that it kind of support itself.
So if you don't mind, would you expand then if that is true, then the core mission of the university should define those areas.
Correct.
In its mission statement or a subset of the mission statement, that this is a focus that we have. So it's clear to all stakeholders that that's important.
That's right. And oftentimes a resource allocation model is an articulation of the mission and the priorities of the university. And the model should be adaptable such that as priorities evolve over time, the model can adapt to those changing priorities as well as just the changing kind of financial conditions of the university.
As the chairman pointed out, that's more of the, I said mission, and he actually corrected me if he's right. It's the strategic plan of how we go about it. Yeah. So then my last comment is, would you agree or disagree that then this effective resource allocation at some point cannot just be defined as a science, but there's an art to it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And we need to be sensitive to that. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
As an aside, it's probably not a coincidence. I noticed University of Southern California was the first university on your chart. And I think Stephen Sample was president, and he was a very famous president. And what they did changed that university from a good university to a real powerhouse. And it's probably not a coincidence that they went through this process 35 years ago.
One of my mentors was John Curry. I believe he was chief financial officer.
Go ahead, please.
So this next section here, we'll talk about kind of translate what I've been talking about in terms of industry-wide to the project here at Western University. So these are the project goals that were established at the outset of the project at the beginning of this calendar year. The primary goal is to develop a performance or incentive-based model that will address the following desires. The first of which is to align with the state's funding formula to better position the university to increase state funding. Second piece is to address current financial trends and to put in place incentives that can help to drive student enrollment growth through research enterprise. A third piece is to, as we were talking just a moment ago, allocating funds in a way that will support the university's strategic plan. Also rewarding performance and investing in strategic priorities in an equitable manner. And then finally, and this can't be overstated, increasing transparency and simplicity in resource allocation. So transparency in the sense of helping the campus community understand all the inflows and outflows of the university's financials. But moreover, also having a model that's that balances kind of precision with simplicity. Some universities in the past have made the mistake of going too far down the path of like a cost accounting model. I'll give you an example of a university, I won't name it, but they had created a model by themselves, and I believe the manual to understand the model was about 125 pages long. There were about 3 people on campus. And as a result, it led to indecision because people couldn't understand it, and so they didn't really understand what were the incentives, and that's not an effective model. So you want to kind of balance those ideas of precision with simplicity such that you need a model where people clearly understand the incentives and then can act accordingly. So these are all things that are kind of regularly being contemplated.
Yeah, I want to point something out that's more of a comment as opposed to a question, but bullet point 1 is aligned with state funding formula, and then bullet point 4 is reward performance and investment and strategy. To identify on performance, in common with a lot of our state formula funding will be a performance base that's actually established by the General Assembly. Is that aligning with both of those bullet points, or first one? Or
it is, and one of the things that the steering committee has been thinking about is, as I understand it, as part of the state's performance funding formula, there's a student success metric.
Correct.
Around bachelor's degrees awarded, and so that's what the committee is considering. All right, how do we kind of incent that type of behavior where those academic units that can help kind of drive those bachelor's degrees completion rates can be rewarded accordingly. This next slide speaks to the project guiding principles. So at the outset of the project in January, we met with the steering committee, talked about the importance of principles to kind of govern the development of a new model. Each of the committee members submitted a list of 4 to 5 guiding principles. We kind of captured that, looked for common themes, aggregated it, and then kind of shared a working draft back with them. And then we kind of iterated on that back and forth over a few meetings. And this is really the kind of current draft of those principles, which I think is a good set of principles and representative of what I've seen at other institutions. And so I'll kind of lightly touch on each one of these. I know there's a lot of text up here on the slide, but one is to create a clear link between resource allocation and the university's mission, its priorities, and its commitment to student success, so drawing a stronger relationship between those ideas. As I mentioned previously, the importance of having a model that's flexible and can adapt and respond to changing conditions. It's not just a static model that's put in place and is never reevaluated over time. A consistent and predictable methodology for revenue and cost allocation that's easy to understand and features the incentives that we've been talking about is also a core principle of the steering committee. Promoting a collaborative and sustainable budgeting process, one that promotes transparency, efficiency, and accountability is also key. And this is a collaborative and sustainable process across kind of all academic and administrative leaders around the institution. A holistic approach to budgeting that reflects a shared commitment to the fiscal health, that we're better together. This isn't some kind of what some universities have done is kind of this every tub on its own bottom kind of model. This is a model where units are kind of working together to help kind of in concert move the institution forward. And then finally, we talked about the importance of good data that's readily available, trusted, timely, et cetera, et cetera. And so particularly institutions that are moving towards an incentive-based model, there's much more of a draw on data, not just financial data as it relates to revenues and expenses, but also institutional metrics that might be used to incent certain types of behavior. So that could be square footage, student headcount, employee headcount, credit hours, degrees awarded, those types of things. And so deans and their teams need that information kind of at their fingertips to be able to understand and kind of develop their operational plans and monitor the progress against those plans. Yes, sir.
You know, this is really good and we need this. But my question again, I'm relying on your experience since you've had this with other universities. Is there an opportunity for micromanagement of one department over another to be critical of their decision-making process? I understand this shared vision and going forward, but you know, we all have our own interests sometimes, and one department might feel they're more important than others. And how do you overcome that? How do you bring everyone to the focus that the mission is the most important and not your individual department or you see what I mean? If you're sharing a lot of data, somebody can be very critical of what you're spending your money on. So how do you overcome that? Is that the art part or?
Well, there's a couple pieces to that. I think one is that oftentimes with this decentralized approach to budgeting, not only are you you're giving more of the local units kind of authority over the revenue that they earn, but with that comes the responsibility. And so oftentimes in these types of incentive models, deans now have some more control to kind of shape their destiny, but they're still accountable for spending within their means. And so the thinking behind these decentralized models is the folks that are kind of closer to the action at the local level are better positioned to make choices that are in the best interest of their students and the colleges and schools missions. But again, with the transparency comes accountability to ensure that deans are, again, living within their means and making decisions that are consistent with the strategic priorities of the university. That steering mechanism that I talked about before helps to incent those types of behaviors, knowing that there's oftentimes kind of some money available at the center to invest in strategic priorities. Deans have the ability to kind of submit proposals and plans for that. And to the extent that they're in line with strategic priorities, they can be given dollars to fund certain activities. And so that helps to kind of balance this central and local goals that we talked about, giving more responsibility and authority to local units, but also ensuring the behaviors that they're involved in help the institution as a whole and not, sending different schools and colleges in different paths that kind of don't help the university as a collective move in the way that it wants to move.
So that as it goes back up the flow, it does match with what the chairman was saying, that it matches with the performance model of the state.
That's right.
And the competition is more of, instead of critical, it's more healthy.
Yeah, and I think with the transparency also comes more collaboration, because now all the budgeting decisions don't happen behind the curtain, kind of in the black box, and people don't really quite understand why we are getting the funding that we're getting, except that, well, it was kind of what we got last year plus some change at the margins. Now there's more transparency. I've heard a number of deans talk at other institutions that now that there's transparency, I understand how I can better collaborate with my colleagues across the street to create new programs, and we understand how revenue flows accordingly. So that frees us up to be able to work together. In the old incremental model, we could do things together, and it might be the right thing for their respective schools and the institutions, but we don't understand how the financials work, and we feel as if we might have to incur that cost upon ourselves, and that can be a disincentive for people. You might want to grow your program, but and you're helping the university grow revenues as a result of more students coming on, but you're not directly benefiting from that. You're not, even though you're incurring the cost that might be associated with new programs. And so that can provide a set of disincentives to want to grow programs. And these decentralized models, that stronger relationship between those ideas of revenue generation and distribution frees up teams to want to work better together.
I want to emphasize something, and it's really important. This is not a comment, it's a comment, not a question. We have taken a completely new attitude here about how we approach things in this university from shared revenue on down. This is an excellent example of moving in that direction, Mr. President.
You've actually, to me, you've actually described the sunrise. I mean, you've told us what it's going to look like and how it'll work. So we appreciate that, and this work that you've done certainly is a different direction. We think this will be very beneficial for the future project.
I think Andy raised her hand first.
Thank you. I have two questions, both quite short. So the steering committee with whom you've been working has been the steering committee of the strategic.
Andy, need to speak up. We got a mower in the background.
Okay, the steering committee that you've been working with, is that the steering committee of the strategic plan, or?
I understand it's a different.
It's a different group. And then moving forward, how do you foresee yourself working with, I guess, different members of the campus community to adapt and respond? And like, how often would this take place? Who would these stakeholder groups be?
Yeah. So there's a slide that follows a little bit that kind of talks about our project plan, but on the front end, we're engaging heavily with the academic leadership to ensure that they're understanding what we're doing and incorporating their feedback. And then from there, we move forward and start to kind of continue to broaden the engagement to include research units and central support units, faculty, partnership. We're still kind of fairly in the first half or so of the project, but a lot more stakeholder engagement.
And the adaptation and response, so that would sort of come, would it be like an annual basis, or?
In terms of kind of adapting the model to changing conditions. Yeah, the best practice that I've seen is that again, at University of Bloomington, they actually put together a committee every 5 years. They kind of come together and evaluate the model. And they say, are we still staying true to our guiding principles? And they actually put out a report every 5 years. And by and large, they operate under a decentralized form of budgeting. They stay very true to that. They've made some changes at the margins to reflect that IU is a different institution today than it was in, I think, 1990 when they moved to the model. But that's a practice that we would recommend. We suggest that whatever incentives and principles you put in place, you keep it consistent for at least several years, because you don't want the rules to change every year. That makes it difficult for leadership to kind of do long-term planning, which is really what we want to incentivize in this type of a model. Not just looking at the next 9 months, but looking out the next 4 to 5 years.
I'm sorry.
I sort of want to go back to, you showed us a list of universities. And I mean, these principles sound all wonderful and they sound good, but the devil is always in the detail. So can you elaborate a little bit on, suppose the university switches to such a thing. So how would you measure that this is successful? That's question one. And question two is, yes, there's an impressive list of universities, but does it happen that, for example, university adopts such a model and then decides after a couple of years, no, this was a failure and changes? So what is your track record of success in the long term working with clients?
Yeah, I'd say to answer the first question, I think in terms of how do you measure success, I think in large part it really goes back to these guiding principles. And this is kind of one of the key roles of the steering committee, to ensure that whatever alternative model the university comes up with, that it embodies these guiding principles and it continues to do so on a go-forward basis. In terms of the other question, I've seen a couple examples of universities that have moved towards more of a aggressive kind of market-driven, this every tub on its own bottom type of model, only to kind of retreat from that years later, to move towards more of a balanced approach between local and central roles. So that's the couple instances come to mind where universities have kind of gone too far to the right, so to speak, and come back to kind of a more balanced. What WKU is contemplating is more that balanced approach, where again, more authority and responsibility to deans, but also with working with strong collaboration kind of with central leadership.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Tamara.
So, as Bob Regent Ernst's comment, devil's in the details. And we talked about being transparent and very collaborative, but at this point, it's still, I think that transparency and collaboration is very limited to the ramp group itself. If I'm not mistaken, there's not many people outside of that who really know the details of this. You know, I myself still have some questions on, you know, we talk about revenue generating areas and things, which we've got a lot of areas of the university that don't generate revenue, but are critical to what we do. But so does the transparency that we're talking about and all that take place once the ramp committee has come up with their plan, and then we learn more about it at that point? That may not be more for you, maybe more for Anderson. But how does that work? What does it look like, since it doesn't feel really transparent at the moment?
I understand. We've talked about a straw model that it would not be in our best interest in this preliminary stage to present it any more than that, because the deans and others that are trying to help shape a draft. But let me give you some indication of what's going to be unfolding. Early in May, we're going to have an open forum on campus. Probably a lot of this material as well. In early June, we're going to have panel discussions. One of the variables that you would fully understand is change is difficult. It's causing, just talking about it is making people anxious. So we're going to bring in a panel of universities that have successfully moved to this type of model, and had 3 different groups. I can't remember how we're exactly structuring it, but 3 different opportunities to interact with everything from a provost to a chief financial officer. What did you learn from this process in your campus? How's it working? In June, there's going to be a dean's retreat. There may be a slight break in July for some people to be gone. And then we'll gear up in August. So I don't know exactly how this engagement will fold out, but yes, it will be increasingly broad audiences at the same time as small groups, back to the business officers to say, what does this mean to you specifically?
And there are faculty and staff involved in all of this.
Absolutely. And we'll go back to University Senate again, Budget Council again, and we won't be successful if we don't have broad participation in this process.
And was there a meeting yesterday? Budget Council.
Yeah, Budget Council and University Senate Finance and Budget Committee, and some great comments yesterday that we'll through any of these discussions take back to the steering committee. For example, one faculty member said, I try to act in the best interest of a student, and I believe that student belongs over in a different college. I'm going to help facilitate them to be successful in another college. Well, why would I do that if my college is going to lose money? So, people are thinking about how do you incentivize the right behavior in the interest of the student, and not be so driven by what are the financial implications to your own college.
Freddie is.
Yeah, and my question centers around picking up on some of the comments that Regents really has made and others. At what point does the Board of Regents become a stakeholder in this discussion of identifying, participating in the identification of core mission? I know some of that will be developed under the strategic plan, but as I'm listening to you, it sounds like the budget model and the strategic plan are on parallel tracks, but not necessarily will they meet at some point. And so I don't hear the Board of Regents becoming a participant in this process.
If I may, I think the place where this conversation comes together and is the architect of all this stuff. What we want to ensure occurs is that number one, we don't overload different portions of the organization. And so keeping separated strategic planning and budgeting made sense at the outset. But what you're going to feel as a board is it coming together. And so this summer, both the budget model and the strategic plan will be an important component of our Board of Regents retreat. And so we'll spend some significant time talking about how you see them aligning, what the campus has brought forward. And the goal is to have, again, the stuff baked enough where it makes good sense strategically. And there's strong alignment, but not completely baked, so there's the opportunity to shift it and fine tune it and make sure that it's where the board wants to go. I think the challenge is wanting to get down into the level of detail when you talk about the model, right? So how does the model shift priorities, align resources with those priorities? What are those priorities? Balancing that with staying at the strategic level. So we're going to try to keep those two things appropriately separate.
If we can go ahead, because I'm going to be conscious of time here.
Yes.
And I know that Ann just made a comment about timing, so you may be able to go through that.
All right, I think this is next to last slide. So I'll kind of wrap up here. This speaks to just a high level project plan for kind of what we're calling phase 1. And so this just shows kind of the beginning of the project in late January, kind of through the end of this phase 1 in mid-June. This red bar kind of represents where we are right now. And so we've just kind of structured this slide to account for kind of different work streams or kind of sets of activities. So very early on, we did this current state assessment. That's where we went out and met with a number of stakeholders to get a sense of their current perspectives on budgeting as it operates today, and what's working well and what's not working well, where is there opportunity for improvement. So we want to be mindful of what works well in the current model. We want to be able to carry that forward in any new model. Where there's pain points as it relates to the new model, we want to make sure any new model addresses those pain points. So we spent a significant amount of time on the front end talking with lots of folks. Data review, we collected all the financial and institutional data we'll be using in the model, and then kind of focused our model build here. Essentially what we've done is create this kind of budget model prototype that allows us to run all kinds of different versions and scenarios in the model, do sensitivity analysis. And then we start our stakeholder engagement. This is going to continue on into phase 2, but we're engaging folks. We're talking to them about different concepts and ideas. We're getting their feedback, and we're incorporating that in future iterations of the model. So it's a very iterative process along the way. Kind of see these two things running in parallel, engaging stakeholders and then refining the model based on what we're hearing from them. We're also running in parallel some model training as it relates to central budget staff who will have responsibility for kind of operating the model on a go-forward basis. Phase 2, more stakeholder engagement to come. We'll also start to broaden the stakeholder engagement. We'll also do things around kind of infrastructure development, help the university think through administrative structures, governance structures, what kind of tools and data will you need to really operationalize this once the model is at a state where you kind of go live. Our best practice is to have some kind of a hold harmless or parallel process whereby as you're still being funded according to the way things work today, you have the benefit of seeing what the new world would have looked like had you been in it, even though you're not. And so that gives leadership time to kind of adapt their thinking to whatever the new incentives are in the new model.
Do we have the technology, most current ability to share this data? As you use the word training, are we training on an old platform, or is our platform being robust, and is it robust enough for us to do a particular deep dive on these things? In other words, once you finish your work, will that translate to the platform that we have available to us on this campus? And specifically, do we have the budget funds allocated to make sure that this goes forward?
Speak to that.
Well, there's a lot of humor there. I didn't know what
I'm happy to take the question. We have the financial enterprise resource planning system is a good one. And so that's allowed us to kind of download and extract data.
Ours.
Correct.
Yes.
Some universities choose to get a kind of what they call an enterprise performance management system that kind of sits on top of the financial system that allows you to do a lot of the modeling and data analytics on kind of a platform that's shared. I don't believe the university has that. That's something that you could add on that wouldn't require you to change your financial systems. It's just kind of a bolt on top. This would allow you to kind of run different scenarios kind of in real time. In productivity software worksheets like Excel or things like that. But plenty of universities move forward and don't have that enterprise performance management system. So it's just a.
But as our consultant, you suggest that it's a good thing.
That enterprise performance management system.
Yes.
Yeah, it's worked well for a number of institutions.
Thank you.
Just
Go ahead,
on such a system, does that give the users, those in the departments, access to the information? They would have access to that.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a shared platform. And when you think about the annual budgeting process, there's certain general revenue streams that are often forecasted by the central budget unit with respect to undergraduate tuition and general state appropriations. But then there's also revenue that's best forecasted at the local unit as it relates to, say, auxiliary sales or gifts and things like that. And so that platform allows both kind of central inputs and local inputs to come together into kind of a comprehensive all funds budget approach. And that's one of the benefits of a enterprise performance management system. You kind of have that shared platform, so you're not necessarily emailing spreadsheets back and forth to one another, because there's always the issue about too many spreadsheets and version control.
So you made a comment earlier that the departments would have access to information about what it would look like if they were operating in the new system. Where do they get that? And who's managing that process? Is it paper? Is it an email? Is it a spreadsheet?
I think there's a broad spectrum that exists. We did some work at University of North Dakota, and they have what they call an iDashboards platform, and particularly related to the activity level metrics. It allows the department chair to kind of go in and drill down on students, credit hours, and success completion rates and square footage, and they can kind of drill down and roll up, and understanding that those activity level metrics are part of the budget process has helped them to kind of develop better plans to ensure that they're well positioned for the new model. In fact, Anne mentioned earlier about the panelists. We're working right now to try to get a dean from the University of North Dakota to come here to campus to kind of share his perspectives on budget redesign and what recommendations we have for other institutions.
I'm still not sure if my question is answered. How am I going to get it today?
Okay. And sorry to be somewhat evasive, but we need to address this in the second phase of the project. Where we are now is highly dependent on exceptionally talented individuals in IT and in institutional research to generate the data centrally. So we still have to make decisions how we have a system called data analytics. How do we allow a dean in the department to have a more decentralized access to data? So we don't have a good answer yet, but we invest in the next 6 months.
Yeah, this is really just kind of I apologize, it's kind of hard to see, but this was just an expansion of the project plan before, where we called out some of the steering committee meetings, and then the coloring didn't come through, but this is intended to kind of show different phases of the work as we're talking with deans and panel events and things like that. So again, this is just representative of phase 1 in June. As Ann mentioned, then kind of phase 2 begins shortly thereafter.
Are we looking at running parallel systems starting July 1? Be ready for that.
I'm not sure that that's achievable, but we will sometime in the fall start doing that.
Do back up and capture the data from July 1.
We have to be sensitive to new leadership coming in and not having them come in as if the decisions have been made. So we're carefully balancing that. So I'm not exactly sure that we will be able to do it July 1, but I know that they'll be able to see a parallel before we start developing the 1920 budget. We're probably going to have some internal discussions as to, if you do this on aggressive timeline, you could have some unintended consequences.
So we're going to have to evaluate that. He hasn't heard this, but we might have to do parallel to today, a parallel system a little later. We're just going to have to evaluate what's in our best interest.
That concludes my presentation. So again, I appreciate the time.
One question I'd probably like to direct to you, Tony, is that I'm kind of go for Regent Higgins' question, and that is the board will have the opportunity to engage in policy decisions. What we think the right approach might be, one way or the other. So we're a part of that function as well.
Absolutely. I think that there's a place where
we think this is important. We don't think this is important, which may be different from somebody else.
Yeah, I think the way my understanding of the way we'll move through is through the Budget and Finance Committee first, and then bring that to the whole board. But I think that as it gets more concrete, that's the place where we're going to start to engage with the board as well. But
the concrete won't set until such time.
That's exactly right. Concrete won't set till apparently sometime in the mid-fall, as I'm learning today. So,
George,
just one other question, and I forgot. Apologize for being late. So maybe you covered this, but this is a huge undertaking, and there are a lot of systems issues. There are a lot of organizational issues. Is there a plan or someone looking at the risk perspective of this? So I got a plan. I know what I want to do, and I know how I'm going to try to execute it, because I got all this stuff that's coming into that. And I just worry about, from an operational risk perspective, what are we doing this, and so you mentioned the University of North Dakota, that's great. They can tell us the value that something gets, but I'd actually like to know not just the pain points for people who are going on the system, but what are the things I got to watch for to make sure that I'm progressing the way I want to. And so that's the, when I read through this, that's the part I didn't really get, that we have that operational risk plan behind us, because this thing could fall apart, not because we don't have a good plan, and not that we didn't execute well. So I just didn't hear that part. I was curious if we thought about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a kind of core part of the kind of phase 2 as it relates to kind of putting forth an implementation plan and kind of following the one of the values of the parallel process is that it provides the institution time to kind of build that infrastructure. And it's critical such that you're not in the old world on a Friday and the new world on a Monday, and people don't know what to expect. And there are some institutions that have chosen to kind of extend that parallel process a little bit until they feel like the infrastructure is in place such that the campus units can be successful in the new environment. And that comes with tools, policy changes, structure, a whole host of things, ensuring that people understand the incentives, the implications of those incentives, and they feel like they see a path forward to be successful. And so that's all kind of part of what we'll lay out in phase 2, and then we'll be monitoring accordingly. So are we on pace? Are there any unexpected issues that are arising? And if so, how does that impact our ability to kind of go live, so to speak?
Could you suggest anything that we could do or the administration could do that would maybe tone down the anxiety of this process? Now that we've gone through it several times, obviously there are things that that we would not know until we're finished. That would be, there are certain departments that have more anxiety about this because they're not in the middle of, the business college might understand it, but another college might have less of an understanding. And is there any suggestions you could make that we could do to lower the anxiety level so that the success could happen at a real positive pace?
Yeah, I think from Huron's experience, cannot overstate the importance of stakeholder engagement and meeting with people again and again across functions and groups, and the panel event as well. Helping hear is one thing to hear it from a consultant. It's another thing to hear it from institutional leaders at other places in terms of what was there. So if they were to do it all over again, what would they do differently and why?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right,
appreciate the very good presentation. Okay, we go to a shorter information item, and that's the quarterly audit report that was presented on page F5 of the materials sent to your
Oh no, mine's gonna be really long.
Uh-oh. Well, I knew you.
I didn't even do a presentation, so we're good. I do want to say while it's on your mind right now, because Regent mentioned the word risk, I was back here going, yes. Let's talk about that. So I wanted to talk about the third leg of the things that we're discussing, the things that we're changing, the strategic planning process that we're developing, and also the budget model being transitioned to a new model possibly. So the third leg is the enterprise risk management process that we've talked about, and we're trying to build that up here on at the university. And so that's where one of my announcements today comes in. Right now we're kicking off the risk assessment that we do annually. So I want to say to the leadership group that these things that we're talking about when we're developing the strategic plan and we're talking about the new budget model, that should be on the forefront of your mind when we're discussing what risks are out there, because what's going to hinder us from reaching the goals that we're putting in that strategic plan or being able to do the budget model in a way that is successful. So that's one of the announcements. You should have gotten an email this morning while you're sitting here from Julie over there. She sent out the risk assessment that's your part of the Finance and Budget Committee members. So we're asking for your input for that risk assessment. And we do that every year. I don't know if you remember getting that same thing last year. And if you do have any questions about that, you can contact me or email me, give me a phone call. So you should have that. It's a very short survey where we're asking about what your thoughts are, what your expertise, your knowledge, just in the area of the university itself, but also industry-wide, what things are out there that you know about that could impact WKU. So that's actually going to be my last announcement, but it worked out really well. Thank you for that. I do have just a couple of things to talk about. This quarter, we completed just 2 projects. And the first one, and it's on your information item, so that's kind of what I'm going through today. Stell check recovery process audit. Just so you know, that one was not on the audit plan as part of the risk assessment we did last year. It was actually just a management request so that we could get some more insight into the process of the Stell check recovery process, which basically is when WKU cuts a check to an employee or vendor or contractor, whoever the payee may be. And what happens after that leaves the university, and that person receiving the check doesn't process it any further. So they don't cash it, they don't deposit it. That happens. I never do that. My checks that I get, I always cash them. So we walked through that process, and we ended up having 3 recommendations from that, and they were all considered low rated, basically because it was a management request. There wasn't a lot of risk there that was involved in that process, but it was a good way to educate and get into the more depth of that process. The other project is the NCAA football ticket reconciliation. We do that on an annual basis. And that is where we are making sure we're in compliance with the NCAA bylaw 20.9.93. And we are required to, on average, have 15,000 of paid attendance at all the home games for 2 rolling seasons. So we look at that on a 2-year basis. And for this year, we are in compliance. If you look at season 16, season 17, we were able to have, on average, more than that 15,000 requirement in paid attendance. And that project usually results in just a memo that goes out to our athletic director, and they keep those records for NCAA purposes. Other things on your information item are things that are currently in progress. So we have a lot that's been drafted, lots of reports out there that we're either waiting to do the exit conference or we're waiting on action plans from management for those. And those will be coming up soon and be issued hopefully sooner than later. And then, of course, things that are still either in a planning stage or an execution stage, we'll work on that. That is my whole report, short and sweet.
Ready?
This may be just directed to the committee. I had asked for an update on the engineering issue that we had with funding funds, and I don't know whether it's going to be true at this thing.
Well, yeah, you did mention it to me. That probably is something that should be discussed in close session.
I can can give you a small update on that. Do you want that now?
It's up to the chair.
Well, here's my concern. My concern is to the extent that it would have to be in a closed session because of the nature of what occurred. Probably not permitted legally to discuss it in an open session. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind calling them, but we have.
Again, I don't know the context, so I can't. Okay. I have to trust someone's judgment.
At the end of this committee meeting, we're going to have a special meeting notice for the next time. Perhaps we could put it on that agenda. Andy?
I just had a quick question about one of the bullets. So regarding the ethics and compliance hotline, it says that 2 cases are under preliminary review. Did the other 21 cases just not meet standards to review, or was it an issue of volume?
No, those other ones, we've already been through that whole process.
Oh, okay.
Those have been closed based on our findings. With that, when they come in, we do preliminary review, and we try to keep that kind of, we don't want to announce, hey, you've been reported. Right. So it's kind of harder to do when we're doing it that way. Yeah. But we don't want to cause a stir if it's not necessary. But yeah, the rest of those have been closed. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Thank you.
Rapidly moving down now to the last information item. This is information for debt management report. Now this material, in the interest of time, this material has been sent out to everyone previously. I hope everybody's had a chance to read it. And Ann, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, we did give the committee homework with the intent that you do all this reading, studying, and bring back great questions that the expert to my right, Mr. Mark Rawlings, Vice President with Hilliard Lyons, will be able to answer. But in joking, I'll participate if I can. You know, we've taken debt management a lot more seriously by creating a university policy and by creating a debt management advisory committee with individuals from across the campus. And first, let me tell you, I'm not sure how your copy came out when you printed it. We gave you a copy of the debt management report, and my copy had draft on it. It was draft to the Debt Management Advisory Committee, not to this board. So we're not expecting you to take any actions today. The Debt Management Report provides an update on the rating agencies' reviews, our current ratings. It gives you selected financial ratios that are monitored by the Debt Management Advisory Committee. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and see what questions you may have about this report.
Did we want to put the presentation?
We can put the slides up if Jeff, and if there are any questions, these would be the ones that are at the end where Mark would show you where we are in terms of our rating on Moody's and Standards & Poor's, the financial ratios. And the last one was a comparison from the financial reports about our outstanding debt in comparison to benchmark universities, and a calculation of our debt as an amount per FTE student. So if you would like to reference one of those slides, please let us know and we'll go to it.
Well, I'll start with the committee. David or Jason, Freddie, John. Do you have any questions that you going through this? And I know y'all got it earlier, so that's good. All right, anyone else? Class up.
I have a couple of questions. The first question is on page 6 of that Standard & Poor's rating thing. It talks about our full-time equivalent students in that table there. I was wondering if there's a misprint. There's 17,601 for 2017. That seems not quite correct numbers.
What are you talking about? Here.
We may have a data error in the Standard & Poor's report. which indicates that our FTE enrollment for fall of 16 was 17,601. So we're following up. Normally we get the draft report and didn't catch that before it was published.
Can I follow up with some other question? I don't know if you're the right person to ask questions about the ratios, which are computed. So I would like to see more information in the sense of where the actual numbers going into these ratios. So to give you an example of the primary reserve ratio, claim this is or our debt policy, this sort of assessment of the financial health. And I sort of see that this number has increased actually quite dramatically. And certainly for me, as a faculty member on the ground, to think that the institution has gotten financially healthier in the last 3 years seems somewhat contrary to my experience. The second thing I sort of wondering is as follows. The denominator of this ratio is quite large. And so I'm not sure how these ratios can fluctuate so much. Okay, and so that's where I would like to have more explanation. So my intuitive feeling would be if we have basic measurement of financial health and we take out the retirement issue, which the state sort of forces us to keep track of in some sense. Then if I look at the my experience, roughly we have a slight enrollment decline, but these quantities should change by 10, 20%, but I can't see how they suddenly triple. Okay, and so the fluctuation is way larger, an order of magnitude than I would expect. And so if these things fluctuate that much, then I'm wondering if they're actually the right ratios to measure in the first place. So that's a very convoluted, complicated set of questions.
Well, I think we certainly can provide you with the hard numbers that went into each of these calculations. I would probably look at Ann or Jim to actually explain why they think, this particular ratio. Again, as you indicated, we did back out the impact of pension obligations. It's simply expendable net assets divided by total expenses. We generally think that an improving ratio on this one is a very good indicator, as you would expect. But I take it you're skeptical that it actually has been borne out.
As our previous conversation, we don't have the data today, but we're going to provide it to you so you can see the mathematical calculations that are drawn from our financial reports that result in these ratios.
And I would, indicate that both rating agencies as well have indicated that the university's operations on a full cash basis, so on taking out the pension liabilities, are very strong and have been positive. I think both rating reports indicate as much, and they view that as a credit positive. However, it's when you roll in the pension obligations that things start to look a little more dour. And they note that it's both a credit strength and a credit weakness. So I think certainly we can provide you with the numbers that went into these calculations, and then I think you'll agree that they are correct. And it's look at it on a cash basis or on a full pool basis.
John, if I recall, I've been on the board about 6 years this year. That was not actually, to Klaus's point, there may be a change of how we calculated that, because at one time we did not record, we didn't have that obligation. It was not. And it was like all of a sudden 1 year in our financial reporting, it completely shifted. I don't know if someone can help my memory.
It's GASB 68. It was a new accounting standard that went into place in 2015. Well,
and that not that there is an error in the numbers, but there could have been a different way that we reported it. Because if I recall, that was a big issue, because that year that it was announced, we backtracked to try to figure out how that was. We did not necessarily change those numbers.
Well, and that's correct. But to Dr. Ernst's point, we backed out those numbers from this calculation.
So this is a net. Okay. Our discussion was that it was an unfunded the whole thing centered around it was an unfunded mandate. We had no idea it was going to be there, and then all of a sudden it showed up, and so that caused our balance sheet to be all out.
Right. If you look at it just on the face of it, it makes it look like the university is massively underwater.
Right.
Which isn't the case. Obviously, if it were, we'd have to shut the doors. But on a cash basis, things have been positive.
Right.
And Moody's, and just to make this comment and see if you agree or disagree, Moody's and S&P and the rating agencies agree with that analysis.
Yes.
There, as this board has heard from previous rating reports, there's obviously a very strong analytical process for the rating agencies, but we go through an extensive discussion looking at who's our management, how long have they been here, how are we addressing student retention and recruitment, what's going on with our private giving activity. And the rating agencies look at the Student Life Foundation, the WKU Foundation, College Heights Foundation, all of us collectively to come out with these ratings. And the fact that they had us as stable and positive ratings assures people of our, should we have a decision by this board and authorization from the state to issue bonds, that we are in good financial condition to honor those obligations.
That's the whole purpose of the rating, to identify the risk. And they're saying
it's certainly more than just four ratios. While it's sometimes easier to want to have an analytical approach to issuing debt or not, we've got a very good relationship with these rating agencies that spend time understanding WKU.
And I do want to reiterate one point, as the rating agencies look at the credit worthiness of the university, they are generally very comfortable with the financial state of the university. That typically the credit challenges for WKU are that it is a little highly leveraged compared to other comparably rated universities. That means that the amount of debt that you have is a little bit higher than other comparable universities in the same rating category. So that is a credit negative, but they are very comfortable on the flip side of that with the financial well-being of the university. And they haven't generally expressed concerns that the university is going to run out of money, anything like that. It's, and they try to look at the university within certain criteria for each rating category. And then they also compare you to other universities within that rating category to see how you stack up. So the university fares favorably on a financial basis, but you're a little highly leveraged compared to other universities.
Yes, sir. Mr. Rawlings, would you comment, and this may be more than what we need to hear today, but in a raising interest rate environment that we see ourselves in economically in the country and within the market, financing debt at a low interest rate should have a favorable effect of us going forward. Or if our debt is financed at a very low interest rate, and Moody's looks at our balance sheet, it would be much better than if we would have waited some time to finance this debt at a higher rate, so to speak. So does that have an influence also on their?
Yeah, that's fair. And I temper that with, we've been saying that interest rates are going to go up for about 8 years, and they really haven't until really this year. But generally, you're right. I mean, expectations for interest rates are they can't stay at these pretty historically low rates forever. They're going to go up at some point. So waiting, you run the risk of interest rates increasing. You also run the risk of projects just becoming more expensive. So those are two pretty big things to consider when determining whether or not to go forward with the project.
Philosophically, I understand that we have these rating agencies, but I believe the decision to actually engage in any more debt bonds should separate it from this. I don't think it should be driven by the fact that these are ratings such that we can sustain it. I think it ought to be a separate decision, independent of whatever these rating agencies tell us.
Well, in the rating agencies, so they have two functions. One, they provide an annual review of the university's credit because you have bonds outstanding. They would also be engaged to gauge the creditworthiness of a project that the university had already decided to pursue. So we're not sitting around waiting for the rating agency to say, now's a good time to do it because your rating is strong. They're providing a service actually to bondholders. It's a very unusual relationship because the university pays them, but they are beholden to people who actually own the bonds because they're telling them this is the creditworthiness of the university. But we engage them to give us that feedback when we think it's time to proceed with the project.
Let me correct the myth that there's one thing created. Rating agencies don't drive decisions from the university. Never have. As long as I've been here, they never have. And I've never seen a debt that this university has that's never been driven by that decision. So I think that would be wrong to assume that because quite simply, you're right. They are there to protect the bondholders, the purchasers of bonds.
Just a comment. This has been very helpful. I've read over the reports, and I feel like you can imagine an organization where this financial credit reports that big in the financial services world. But the closest point I think is important from a fiduciary standpoint. We as a board have to make sure that the faculty, staff, students, the community that where we are in our financial picture today, we're stable, we're good credit risk, but we do have to address the pension, which the president is doing. And we do have to address the fact that we are over leveraged. And so I think for us, we probably should be in a position at some point in the future, we should be able to explain to people how we're going to manage it. I know that you're working on it from a pension standpoint. We have to manage, we can cover what they were over. But I know there's been issues around, well, are we going to build something else on the campus and so forth? But I think we have a responsibility to say, this is how we're going to manage the university from a financial perspective, based on what we know and how we make independent decisions from this spot, plus what we get from the rating agencies. So I think you're raising a point that people want to know, what are you going to do? And I think that's the issue that we should make sure we're dealing with. And I think we are, from what I know now, but that's the way I look at it is, this is a report, but yeah, we'll answer the pension and we'll answer the long-term leverage issue. We should be doing that. That's what we're responsible for.
Well, I agree with what you say, George. I think there's two elements, two factors in that formula. One is, do we have and do we manage an overall policy, period? And then number two, you look at, oh, wait a minute, we've got a project coming in, so you do it on a single basis. And then you have to take that overall policy and make sure it applies on a case-by-case basis. But you start at the top with the policy. And we have to vary that policy in with what the state requires us to do, what the statute requires us to do. And we've got, to issue bonds, sometimes we have to be in a position we have to secure state approval. Sometimes CPE approval, if we're talking about fees, student fees, and that sort of thing. We've got compliance with the debt policy. We've got a committee that reviews that. And then we've got ratios. And we look at the debt reports you just made. Now we look at all of that. Now we apply it to the project down here that we just now want to talk about. This is hypothetical, almost as we consider that. And the board then has to take that and make that final approval. Well, there are a lot of checkpoints off in that.
And I think that's an important thing that we've got to articulate to those outside of this group, that we do manage that process. And again, when I looked at it, that was sort of where I migrated to, is how do we manage through the process and make people feel confident that we're making good, sound policy decisions on behalf of the financial position of the university. But I think you're asking the right questions, but I think we're doing that. We probably need to do a better job so that people feel comfortable and that we are responding to their issues and questions.
Well, I think the fact that you guys are having these conversations at all speaks very highly to the responsibility of this board and that you take your fiduciary responsibility very seriously. Not all institutions have these types of conversations. Not all institutions have a debt policy at all. And, you know, that speaks highly of the university of this board. And it's not unrecognized either by the rating agencies when they do start talking about the university's credit.
Okay, Mark, thank you for coming down here.
Absolutely. Always glad to come back to this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
And do we have Brad Wheeler and maybe the
Yes. Thank you for the acknowledgement.
will you let Brad know we thank him? He told me he was going to order them. Thank you. So Brad Wheeler, everybody, just you know, Brad Wheeler. Because he's going to give me some alumni merchandise if I kill him and kill myself too to get it. So.
Make sure it happens. Mr. Chair, that's all.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. Okay, that concludes with one announcement that I would like to make from the Finance and Budget Committee. We would like to schedule a special meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee on May the 11th before the regular board meeting for the purpose of making a presentation of information related to budgets. So, Julia, whenever we get those times set, you know, it'll be sometime in the morning before our regular meeting.
I'm sorry, I just walked in.
A special meeting of the Finance and Budget Committee on May the 11th, which will be preparation for the June meeting. If I've said that correctly.
Thank you.
Sunrise service.
Sunrise service. That's exactly right. So that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think Mark made a great comment when he said just having these discussions is valuable for the public to see and for us to engage in. So I find myself more thankful to have the people around the board that we do who understand finances and who are asking some great questions. CPAs, lawyers, mathematicians, and I think that's a great collection of people and thoughts. So with that, we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back and conclude the rest of our meeting. 5-minute break, okay? We'll be back at 10:15.
Okay.
But they will. You don't have to really understand this.
Okay, we're gonna reconvene. I didn't know that, but then. All taken care of. Oh my God. They're a hard group. To her.
This is easy. Should have got some ones I got.
Yeah. My woodworking shop.
Yeah, I'll introduce you.
Okay. Regent Ridley.
Well, he took him longer to put his lipstick on and go to the restroom.
All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and reconvene our meeting, and I'm gonna ask Regent Henson to introduce our students.
Chairman, while we're stalling for Regent Ridley, I would like to acknowledge Mr. Anthony Gilbert, who got the lawnmower to stop.
I thanked him in the bathroom. Yeah. All right, Regent Henson.
Oh, you're waiting.
Well, I think we'll go ahead.
Okay. All right, guys, what a great day to be a hilltopper. Could we not have better weather? Look at this. And Dr. Cavani, it's all in honor of you. They decided to have sunshine and warm weather in today's celebration. And if you haven't gotten your M&Ms, come see me. They have a very nice feature on them. They have WKU, Big Red, Go Tops, and they have Dr. Cavani's head on M&Ms. So on the red and white. So if you'd like a bag of M&Ms, please see me. This is what I do in my spare time when I'm on conference calls at my office. When they take on and on and on, I start shopping. So you are a benefit of this lovely shopping. And since we're celebrating everything today, it is my honor to get to introduce Audra Jennings from the Office of Scholar Development. She's going to introduce you to some of our students that are over the top. These students need to be recognized.
So thank you so much. I want to just briefly contextualize the success of the students I plan to introduce today. So last year, WKU students and recent graduates earned recognition in national scholarship competitions 74 times, earning over $470,000 in those competitions. This year, WKU students and recent graduates submitted 223 applications for nationally competitive scholarships, up from 181 last year. And so far this year, our applicants have earned recognition 74 times already, and we're still waiting on additional news. And they have won over $660,000. So we have had some really tremendous success, including a few very big firsts for WKU. Because we're still waiting on announcements for this cycle, I haven't yet contacted Institutional Research to give you some data about this year's class. So I want to just briefly tell you a little bit about the students who won scholarships last year. So 42% of those students received Pell Grants, of those students who won national scholarships at WKU. 19% of our winners last year were students of color. 22% were first-generation college students, and 38% were not students in the honors college. So very diverse group last year and this year as well. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce you to a few of this year's National Scholarship recipients. And so I'll have students come over when I call their name and stay up here with me. So Dana Beeklich-Spezial has been selected as an NSF Graduate Research Fellow. The fellowship will provide a $34,000 a year stipend and a cost of education allowance for up to 3 years, as well as numerous professional development opportunities as Dana pursues graduate studies at the Scripps Research Institute. During her time at WKU, she studied chemistry and Chinese and worked on several research projects, most recently with Dr. Zhang in the chemistry department. She is a past recipient of the Environmental Protection Agency Greater Research Opportunities Fellowship. A little bit of a mouthful there. A participant in an NSF International Research Experience for Students in South Korea, and a graduate of the Gatton Academy. She is from Grayson. Andy Dahmer. Andy Dahmer has been named a 2018 Harry S. Truman Scholar.
WKU's first recipient of this prestigious award, which will provide $30,000 for graduate school and numerous professional development opportunities, including a fully funded government or nonprofit internship in the DC area, assistance with graduate school applications, and educational opportunities to support her ambitions for a career in public service. She's one of just 59 juniors across the nation to be selected for this honor. As you're aware of Andy's work as student regent and student body president, I want to highlight her involvement in undergraduate research. Her research focuses on diplomatic recognition of Taiwan in Latin America, and she has published 3 articles with Dr. Rich in the Political Science Department. She's from Fisherville. Hayden Grace. Hayden was selected as a Wrangell Scholar. He is from Hawkinsville and studies mathematical economics. Last summer, he studied abroad at the University of Exeter through the Fulbright UK Summer Institute program. Hayden will enroll in foreign policy classes at Howard University this summer, participate in professional development activities to prepare for an international affairs career, and will receive a $3,200 scholarship through the Charles B. Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program. Isaac Keller is a first-year student in political science from Kansas City, Missouri, and a member of WKU's National Champion Forensics team. He was among approximately 5% of applicants nationwide to be selected in the Fulbright UK Summer Institute at Aberystwyth University in Wales, where he will study nationhood and identity. The Fulbright UK Summer Institutes are fully funded summer study at one of 10 locations throughout the United Kingdom. Jeremy McFarland received a Benjamin A. Gilman International Scholarship to fund his study abroad program and internship in Beijing this summer. Jeremy is from Campbellsville, studies Chinese and English, and is involved in Bowling Green Fairness. The Gilman Scholarship provides up to $8,000 for students with limited financial means to study abroad. Lauren Peterson. Lauren is of Barboursville. She was named a Barry M. Goldwater Scholar. The scholarship honors outstanding STEM students who aspire to research careers and provides up to $15,000 for undergraduate studies. Lauren, the only Kentuckian honored as a Goldwater Scholar this year, studies biology and chemistry and is a graduate of the Gatton Academy. She conducted extensive research with Dr. Norman in the Department of Psychological Sciences, studying the effects of aging on sensory perception. She has co-authored 5 articles in scientific journals. Nathan Reed is a 4th-year student in economics, international affairs, and Asian religions and cultures from Belleville, Illinois. This fall, he will begin his Chinese flagship capstone year in Nanjing, funded by a Boren Scholarship. Boren Scholarships of up to $20,000 are funded by the U.S. Department of Defense and designed to promote American undergraduates' linguistic and cultural proficiency in world regions critical to the U.S. interests. Devin Richardson was selected as a Wrangell Scholar. He is from Bowling Green and studies political science and international affairs. He studied abroad in Japan last summer on a Gilman Scholarship and also received a critical language scholarship to study Japanese intensively this summer. Devin will enroll in foreign policy classes at Howard this summer, participate in professional development activities to prepare for an international affairs career, and will receive a $3,200 scholarship through the Charles B. Wrangell Summer Enrichment Program. Maggie Sullivan is a graduating senior in international affairs from Louisville. Among many other activities, she has interned for the U.S. Department of State since 2016. Last summer, she completed a placement in the Office of Refugee Admissions in the Bureau of Populations, Refugee, and Migration. She will spend this summer at the U.S. Embassy in Bosnia before beginning a Fulbright English teaching assistantship in Bulgaria in the fall. Ruben Tang is one of 100 students nationwide to receive a Fund for Education Abroad scholarship, which will support his study abroad program in Taiwan, where he will intensively study Mandarin Chinese. Ruben is from Glasgow, studies architectural science and Asian religions and cultures, and is involved in the Pinot Project. The Fund for Education Abroad is a nonprofit organization that aims to increase participation among students underrepresented in study abroad. So,
thank you all. committee like to say anything?
I just think it's awesome that they're here, and I'm glad I didn't go to school with any of you. Really feel like a slacker compared to what you have done, but I'm thrilled that you're going on to represent Western University, yourselves and your communities. So thank you very much.
I'm just wild. Y'all are amazing students and you're doing some amazing things. And I know that you will leave here and one day go off and do greater things. So, but very impressive group. Congratulations.
Well, as a committee member and recipient, I would like to say that I'm really grateful to OSD for all that they do for such a variety of students. And I think that it would be even better if we can incorporate the things that OSD does into the lives of all students, especially encourage more students to work with OSD, because it's not segmented by honors or a specific demographic of students. Everyone can work with them and really achieve their dreams. So I'm grateful that they were a part of my experience here at Western.
Thank you, Andy. Congratulations, you all. You all are quite impressive. We're very proud of you and so glad you're Hilltoppers.
Could we have the student that is doing study on sensory deficits and older people?
It's about sleep too.
Regents, I'd also like to add my congratulations and great pride in these students' individual accomplishments, and also to thank Audra for the work that she does individually, not just with these represented students, but the students across the university who take advantage of the services that the Office of Scholar Development offers. And so what I want to point out is the number of students among this group who are the first in their families to get a college degree, who aren't members of the Honors College, but have taken advantage of this. And there's no better example of the fact that this institution remains an institution of opportunity and access, but also the great effect and the transformation of lives that we engage in every single day. So congratulations.
Thank you all. I guess
just one thing. I don't know how this would work, but it would be great if somehow or another we could advise alumni in the areas that you are locating to that you're there. For example, the two of you are going on the Wrangell Scholars. I'm on the Hill a lot. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. So it's always nice to know I got somebody that I get in trouble or I need help, I can make a phone call. And so I think it would be great if we could somehow let alumni there in case you need something, and also allow you to connect, because I'd like to follow up with all of you all that are in Washington. And I didn't, it's working at the State Department. It'd be great, to have dedicated folks there that know about. So somehow know that we can figure out how to do that connection.
We will work on that.
We'll do that. Okay.
Regent Nichols is hosting an event, a WKU event in DC, June 13th.
So y'all should come over to the house.
Yeah. June 18th, man. It'll be a little bit late.
Okay. We'll have you over anyway.
And thank you all for taking time out to come and allow us to be introduced to you all. I'm just so impressed. And I thank you, Tom and Vale, for letting me be chair of the best committee there is. But how positive this is to be able to recognize students like this, and it's quite an honor to be a chair of this committee. Thank you all.
Very good. That concludes.
Yes, that concludes. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. That concludes the student affairs. I'm so excited about this meeting. Thank you. That concludes the student affairs committee report.
All right, we will move next into the academic affairs committee and Regent Ridley.
Thank you very much, Chairman Bale. I did want to point out that our agenda is 1/3 less than it was originally planned for, so we want to be accredited to be so AA1 has been removed from our action items, so we have two action items, AA2 and AA3, and today we are being presented our provost, who's on his swan song, but we certainly appreciate his leadership and all that he has done for our university, not just for the years, but through this period of transition. It's provost. So thank you, Dr. Lee, very much.
Thank you very much, Regent
And
Ridley.
you're a great historian too.
Well, I have to say, it doesn't feel like I'm on a glide path yet.
No, you're
keep
not.
looking for that, but I haven't quite picked up that curve. But I would like to preface my comments by two things, just real quickly. In terms of the students that we just met, Audra and her team just have a special talent. You see a lot of different kinds of distinctive teaching around this campus. She and her group have a special talent for helping students discover skills they probably didn't know they have, and the best way is to showcase those. Not everybody can do that sort of thing. That's a very special skill, and she has put that to work to the benefit of our students in particular. And you heard a passing reference to our forensics program. Just thought I'd mention that the forensics program ruled the world again at the National Forensics Association competition this past weekend, and we've come back again as national champions. That is something I get to say almost every year, and I never get tired of it. I'm delighted to have the chance to say that again. The next item on our agenda is the approval of an emeritus appointment, and this particular emeritus appointment is Dr. John Harden from the Department of History. John is a third generation, I think John's back here trying to hide in the corner, but John's a third generation Kentuckian. He has degrees from Bellarmine and from Fisk and the University of Michigan. He came to WKU as a member of the history department in 1991. He made full professor in 2009. He has served this university in a lot of different ways. He was assistant dean of Potter College for a while. He's been assistant to the provost for diversity enhancement. He has chaired the university disciplinary committee, which is no easy task under any circumstances. He has served as Kentucky African American Heritage Commission member. He served on the Kentucky Historical Society board, and he is locally chair of the board of directors of the African American Museum here in the Bowling Green area. The thing I particularly want to emphasize for you all about John is that he has been a leader in capturing the story of African Americans in Kentucky. He has written the centennial history of Kentucky State University. He has written a history of the segregation era in Kentucky, a 50-year period in particular, published by the University Press of Kentucky. And perhaps at the most notable level, he is one of 3 co-chairs to undertake the enormous task of preparing the Kentucky Encyclopedia, the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia, which was published a few years ago by the University Press of Kentucky. That was a massive undertaking, and it brought together an enormous amount of information that would have been lost without the work that John provided so much valuable leadership for. I regret very much that John is moving to full retirement, but he has certainly earned it. And I guess I would like to invite you all to applaud John's work. John.
Can I entertain a motion?
So moved.
So moved. Second?
Second.
Very good. Thank you, Rich. Those all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion passes, and we certainly thank you for your service and your contributions to our world and our society. It's extremely important of your life's work. We will not forget this. Thank you, sir.
And the next item on our agenda is I invite your approval of an honorary doctorate to be conferred on Bowling Green native Sam Bush. And I suspect all of you are familiar with Sam's work, Sam's incredible performance skills. He has been a definer in terms of recasting bluegrass music, drawing on influences from a lot of different kinds of directions. He's been nominated 13 times for a Grammy. He's won 3 of them. He's been named Mandolin Player of the Year 4 times by the International Bluegrass Association. The American Music Association has given him a Lifetime Achievement Award for instrumentalism. He is somebody who has really changed the nature of music in a significant and important way. He's always maintained his roots here in Kentucky and specifically here in Bowling Green. But I think he is a very worthy recipient of an honorary doctorate. And I would also add that the notes for this meeting have been provided by Erica Brady, a faculty member in our folk studies program, who has hosted Barren River Breakdown for years and years, and she knows of what she speaks when she says Sam is a significant force in American music.
Do I hear a motion to So moved. In a second? In a second. Are there any further discussion? Not hearing any, I call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. And motion passes. Chairman, that is the report from the academic committee.
All right, we will move directly into the executive committee meeting. We have a couple of action items. All members are present. We have all members of the board here today. And the first item has to do with new athletic contract for new coach for women's basketball. Todd, do you want to say anything about it?
Sure. Our women's basketball program is in the best position it's been in really a generation. So the last 6 years, won 154 games, and we've been to the NCAA tournament for the last 5 years. We hated to lose Michelle Hurd, who was our coach, but a big reason why we had the success that we had was her associate head coach, Greg Collins. He was involved in every aspect of our program. So when Michelle left, it seemed logical to me to promote Greg to the head coach and keep continuity. He has respect of our players, and he's also been heavily involved in recruiting. Because of where our program is right now and the stature that it has and the way it's respected, not only in our conference, but nationwide, I feel the pay scale and the amenities that Michelle enjoys should be the same for Greg. So the contract in front of you is the exact same contract that Michelle Hurd had, no more, but also no less. And we respectfully request that you enable Greg to take over under the same terms that Michelle had.
Okay, do any members of the executive committee have any questions or comments? We have a contract before us. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
I have a question. So you brought to us this year that there was a salary increase for the men's basketball coach, which was funded by private funds.
Right.
And if I would look at the rate of success, you know, the women's program has been successful quite consistently. And was it possible, or would have been possible, to do a similar thing for a women's coach?
We actually did that for the women's coach 3 years ago. The salary was $150 and elevated it by a third to $200. Doesn't mean we won't do it again, but we have done that. The other reason we did it for Rick Stansberry was at the time we did that, he was 6th in our conference in salary, and that moved him to 2nd. The current women's basketball number of 200,000 is 2nd in our conference.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the athletic employment contract with Coach Greg Collins. So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, motion passes. Item number 2 has to do with a memorandum of lease agreement with College Heights Foundation. I believe we have Donald Smith here today. Donald, any comments?
Thank you, Chairman Bale. My name is Donald Smith with the College Heights Foundation, and just to provide an update of why this is before you today, you might remember last summer we talked about a building project with the College Heights Foundation that we were getting ready to undertake. The opinion of probable cost for that construction project was about $1.6 million. As we got the estimates back, it exceeded $2 million, and we found out we could build a new building for about 1.7. So it did not make sense to renovate a building that was 50 years old, that did not have the life structures and the infrastructure that we needed. So now the recommendation is to raise the current facility and build a new one in its place. This is all being done by private support. You all may remember we announced it at that meeting. The lead donor is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Cliff Todd, a generous philanthropist. He's contributed over $2 million to the institution, provided a professorship in longevity and healthy living through the first round of Bucks for Brains money back in 1999, and has also supported scholarships, the renovation of the President's House Fund, and now the foundation building. So as President Caboni and I discussed, we felt like the best opportunity would be to do a $1 land lease, and then the College Heights Foundation would build the building as a separate entity, as opposed to that having to go under the university structure. And we have all funding in place, private support. Some of them are being paid over a 5-year period. So we will have a little bit of a bond issue that will be on the College Heights side that we secured last year at a 3% interest rate before the rates went up. And that'll be paid off over that 5-year period as pledges are paid off. So we ask for your all's agreement today to do a $1 land lease with the College Heights Foundation. You have a sheet in front of you, and this is the map. The new facility will look a little bit different than what the previous one was. For those that recall that facility, it used to be connected to the Craig Alumni Center, now the Craig Administration Center. That connector wing was torn down a couple of years ago. And so now with the new structure, it will face Colonnade Drive more as opposed to just being right behind the Craig Center to give some more space there. Deborah Wilkins has looked at the lease agreement. We're still trying to define exactly the footprint of the building. So we asked that that general area that's behind the Craig Center would be the $1 lease, and we'll refine that more in detail.
Yes. Let me see if any of the executive committee members first would like to ask any questions, make any comments.
No, we just go ahead.
Donald, so do we have the complete funding? I know you said we had some pledges, but do we have like possibly 50–80% of the money in hand to be able to build this building?
Yeah, we're about 70% in hand right now. The rest of it will be financed, and then we'll pay that off over a period of time. The College Heights Foundation has also built up a reserve for that period. So 50 years or so, we've been putting a little bit of money aside, knowing that building is not going to last forever. When it was built in the late 60s, and Brian Russell, I think, is still here, and we've talked to the campus master plan as well as facilities. It was not built to be a 100-year building. 50-year building is what it was
the brick
intended
one,
for.
isn't it? I mean, the kind of ugly, the one that is not.
You're correct. That's appropriate.
I'm sorry. When you drive through campus, I'll be honest with you, and you see that building, it always stuck out to me as a sore thumb, because it just did not look like the Ranger of a lot of other things around here as well. But I just want to confirm, you have at least 70–75% of it already funded, and you have 5-year pledges to be able to pay the rest of it.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, do you expect to have cost overruns, because the Hensons have never built anything or renovated anything? There has not been a major cost overrun.
We're working with planning, design, and construction, and Ross Tarrant Architects out of Lexington, and that is something that we're going to continue to watch. Now, construction costs are going up right now. It's a prime market, and contractors have more work than what they can handle. So it's not a great environment for bidding, but we'll scale it back if we need to.
How long will it take for us to build this building?
So we're anticipated to break ground, assuming you all approve the 1-year lease. We'll get the bids back this summer. We don't want to tear down the current facility until we know those bids are going to come in under budget. Break ground in August, and then we're looking at 11-month construction. So we would be in July, early part of August, heading into the 19th.
And where will your offices be when?
We are currently located, because we thought we were going to renovate that building until these calls came back. We're in the Honors College and International Center on the 3rd floor suite currently, and we'll stay there until we move into the new facility.
And the $1 lease area is that little space up there that kind of has like a little.
Yeah, so the dotted line represents the footprint of the current building. The more solid structure will be the footprint of the new building, and so we'll define exactly what those lot lines are when we do the $1 lease, but we're still working with the architects right now to see what the footprint of the building is going to be.
And some of the issues of that building is it wasn't necessarily handicap accessible.
It is not. You can't enter that building from any direction handicap accessible. There's only restrooms on one floor. So, we meet with a number of elderly individuals that are setting up scholarship funds that simply can't get into our building, or students that have any disabilities can't access us either. So this will all be addressed through the renovation.
I'd like to make a comment at the end.
Okay, anyone else? Andy, do you
My
have?
questions were also regarding ADA compliance. So.
Chair.
Daniel?
One question, just given the current things, and I think I know the answer to this, and I'm sure you will be able to answer it, but if y'all are currently housed in a fairly new, very nice building on campus, and you're being accommodated, is there a need to have this building? And I feel like there probably is, but we've got it already. You're already there. You've already got a space. Do we need to spend that money?
There is, and we did a lot of due diligence as we were thinking about this. The renovation, if we proceeded with it before, was going to give us office space growth for about 3 people. And given the growth that we have within the foundation and the current space that we're occupying, we're already maxed out. And so there would be no opportunity for growth. So as the College Heights Foundation is looking at a 100-year building in the future, this provides that. But also a number of departments on campus are clamoring for the space that we're currently in too. So I'm sure David Lee is still here. We'll attest that he'll be glad when we can vacate that suite that we currently are in.
Okay. Anyone else?
Can you put a parking structure underneath and include more parking up there?
Okay, that would be ideal.
John?
I don't think that's in our budget right now.
Well, I have two comments. Number one, I think that I know Mr. Todd personally. He's been a friend of mine for over 25 years. And when I met him many years ago, I asked him why he was in Bowling Green, and he came to an auction. His reintroduction, the introduction to Bowling Green was at an auction over Mr. O.B. Clark House. And he came to buy furniture, and when he left, he owned property. And I asked him one time, why did he feel that it was important for him to come back and establish a presence in Bowling Green? And he said, when he was in school, he lived underneath the barn, or pardon me, above the stable of the barn at the ag department, which used to sit right out here. And he said if he walked to town often, and when he passed by Mr. Clark's house, he felt like if he ever succeeded, he wanted to own property in Bowling Green. The reason I bring that story up is that is, again, what the spirit that makes the master, that there was a motivation that was created at this university for a successful life path. And once he received that successful life path, he understood his responsibility as an alumnus and also as a successful individual to give back to that same institution. And I don't want us to pass by or gloss over the fact that there are numerous people in our community that are constantly giving to this university for many, many important things. And that brings me to my second point. And I appreciate the word, are we going to build this building, and are we going to be able to utilize the space? We need to remember that a private 501c3 corporation is not the university property. That is the property of those philanthropic givers that is guided by a board of trustees for the fiduciary responsibility of providing with the mission. And if WKU can have more of the College Heights, WKU Foundation, Hilltopper Athletic spirit, we won't have to depend on state funding. We wouldn't have to depend on budget cuts because there is that philanthropic interest out there. This is just one example of many, many people that have given to this university, but we do need to remember that the wonderful job that the College Heights Foundation does and their fiduciary group, as well as all our foundations, have established a wonderful legacy. I think it started in 1923. So for us to even, I know you're here to get our approval, but we should thank you for all that you do for this university. And I don't want us to pass by that opportunity to let everybody know that how important it is.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. President.
I would like to echo Regent Ridley's sentiment. And the College Heights Foundation could locate its building anywhere it was interested in. And I'm both thankful and think symbolically it's important for us to remember the heritage of starting of that foundation with a $100 gift from a faculty member in 1923. And for us to have a place where students who are in need have a place to go to get assistance still. And what a great symbol from Mr. Todd and his investment, but for the entire institution, of a place that cares about its young people and provides a place for them to go get assistance. I can't tell you the number of stories I've heard about someone coming to see Duro Downing and him opening up this little box and writing a note on a card and helping that student out. We got to make sure we remain true to that mission. And I think this building will continue that.
Very good. With that, I'll entertain a motion.
I so move.
Second. Have a motion and a second for approval to authorize a memorandum of lease agreement for $1 a year with College Heights Foundation. Other discussion? Not all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Thank you, Donald. I know your grandfather would be proud of you today.
We appreciate everything that you all are doing, and appreciate President Caboni's remarks. Last year, College Heights Foundation gave away about $5.6 million in scholarships to more than 2,200 students. A lot of deserving students that are out there.
All right, we have an information item, which I will turn over to Ms. Robin Taylor, who is here to update us on some legislative matters.
want the short version or the fast version? The short version or the long version?
Whatever you deem necessary.
Well, so the session is over. The governor's veto period has just ended yesterday. And I think we got pretty much everything we had anticipated as we head toward the end and all the vetoes. I will not go through all of that because it would take a while and it was confusing to say the least. So here are the highlights. The highlights, as you all already know, a 6.25% reduction to the state appropriation for higher ed overall. But 31 million of that went back to higher ed to flow through the performance funding model. That is generally very good for us. Clearly, had we not lost the 6.25%, we would have been somewhat better off, but we'll break even. I kind of have to depend on Ann to confirm all the numbers, but we'll break about even with that. That's and there was, some of you might remember, at one point there was equity funding that went in for WKU and NKU specifically. That money is going to flow through the performance fund. So instead of coming directly to our base budgets at WKU and NKU, it plussed up a little bit of what they were planning to do in the performance funding bill or in the performance funding model. So again, I think the general wisdom, if I understand Bob King and CPE, is that really is going to flow to us anyway, since it comes to it, because we'll take the first sort of part of the pie of the performance funding to get to the equity piece. So that was good news. The Kentucky Mesonet was funded. You will remember the governor had eliminated that as part of the 70+ programs that were slated for elimination. We successfully kept that in, so we're pretty happy about that. That's a major statewide initiative for us that would not likely have been able to continue had we not been able to do that. So quite frankly, there was unanimous support among legislators that we spoke with, and in many meetings, which is not always the way it works, but in many meetings, they brought it up to us before we ever had an opportunity to bring it up to them. One disappointment, the Gatton Academy was cut by 2%. They did a similar cut to the Craft Academy, about $75,000. Lynette is aware of that, obviously. And then I do want to just address this briefly because I think it's important, and if I don't, I'm sure that President Cavoni will. There was some language that was added in the bill related to tenure, and the chair of the Faculty Senate and I corresponded quite a bit during the last several weeks of the session as that language came about. We view the language regarding tenure, and what that essentially does is it says that if you eliminate academic programs, you can eliminate the tenured faculty that go along with them with 10 days notice. We have our own set, I guess, of rules but AAUP guidelines that really sort of guide this for all of higher education. And we feel like the language in the budget bill, which only lasts for 2 years, is permissive, and that we can continue and will continue to follow the AAUP guidelines and the appropriate process for how you eliminate any faculty members that go along with any programs that are eliminated. And I would kind of reference David Lee and President Cavoni if you all want more information on how that works, but we feel like we're okay on that. And quite frankly, even in the discussion in the conference committee, Senator McDaniel, who was the primary author of that language in the Senate version of the bill, which is what ended up in the bill, he made sort of the same comment that he didn't call it permissive, but he also said we had our own, that we would follow our own processes. So one of the things that occurred sort of in the overnight, late night things on the budget, which were, we think, very helpful to us, but it was an effort to try and I guess maybe give us a reprieve for a year as they determine how to deal with that intention, is they froze our KERS rates. So you all heard us talk about how our KERS rates were slated to go up to 83%. They're going to stay where they are for 1 year. Now, that is, we have 1 year, and then they go back up to, I guess, 84%, 83%. So we've got a year to figure that out. And I think that the intention of the legislators who who made the effort to do that. And again, I think that was leadership on both House and Senate. But I think their intention was to give a year to determine how to deal with higher ed. They didn't really deal with the higher ed cost issue. There was, again, the long version, a couple of different bills that tried to do that. In the end, we're going to have a kind of a 1 year to study it and figure it out thing. So we are hoping for some positive outcome there. We were really, really pleased to have the elimination of the 5.1% penalty that we pay to KTRS on all of our faculty and professional employees who opt to go into a private retirement system. That's an option that faculty and again, administrators have. That penalty was set to be in place till 2049, and they eliminated it beginning July 1. So that will create some savings, and I think we'll figure that out as well. But that was a win, and that was a big win. Something that we had certainly lobbied for and had been asking for some time. I don't want to go into all the different things on pension. What I'll just say is that there weren't a whole lot of changes to existing employees in what they ended up doing. The biggest thing for us is on the horizon, and it's a little difficult at the moment to talk much about it because we don't really know, but Ann's probably over there going, don't say that. But one of the things that they did is in the pension bill is they will eliminate the subsidy for higher education in KTRS. That we never see it. It's just a general fund subsidy that goes to KTRS to cover sort of the gap between what K-12 pays and what higher ed pays and what the actual contributions need to be. So in 2020, they eliminate that for higher ed. That will effectively double what we pay in employer contributions to KTRS, and that is terrifying. So that's something that we still have to figure out and deal with. And I'm not sure very many legislators recognized that that was in there when they passed that pension bill. At least some of the ones that I spoke with did not know that. And then finally, there was a statutory relief bill that was passed on the last day. We waited until midnight to ensure that the governor signed it or didn't sign it or vetoed it. He did sign it, so this is good. And this bill, House Bill 592, it covers a wide range of things. One that you all will probably appreciate is that it will now allow for video teleconferencing for our public meetings. When the primary location is noticed and the public can see and hear, you all can have meetings, and I believe including closed meetings by teleconference now. So that is very helpful. And I'm sure that y'all like that. It will also allow us to, George, that was just for you. That was for you. It'll allow an institution, it allows to opt out of the State Fire and Tornado Fund, which some say will give us some savings. It will also allow some real property to be sold at fair market value. A couple of other things. There's one thing in there that is really the big price factor for us, and that is there was a statute early on after higher ed reform was passed in '97 that so if I were any institution, you're an employee of any institution, you can go to another institution for free for 6 hours a semester. And I think we are one of the bigger providers of that. So we have a lot of employees at other institutions who come here for free. What this will do is we'll effectively eliminate that, and it leaves it to the institution to determine how you want to handle employee waivers. It does not affect, I'm gonna look at you, Tim, it does not affect our waiver for our employees to go to our institution. It only affects those employees who go to another institution, but the savings for us is on the employees who are coming from other universities here. And it is a pretty substantial amount of money. So that was another one of our wins. And then again, to Regent Nichols, who is the big winner in this whole session. He was the first university board member to be confirmed. And I will tell you that the rest of them got confirmed by midnight on the final hours. So anyway, the big winner of the legislative session. So that's the highlights, I think. and there's probably a little bit more, but if there's anything more you want to kind of delve into, you might want to catch me later, but happy to answer your questions.
The subsidy you mentioned, which is going to be cut by 2020, this is only for KTRS. This is not for KPRS.
Correct. So the general fund doesn't subsidize KERS. The general fund does subsidize KTRS. And I will tell you that we didn't really recognize that. We don't know that. There's no, I don't want to overuse the word transparency, but there's no transparency there that we would have even caught that language for one thing, because it's hard to even recognize that language, isn't it, Ann? Had the sponsor of the bill not pointed it out to me, I don't think anybody would have caught it. And so we met with the bill sponsor, met with the bill drafter, and talked with them. And that was when Senate Bill 2 or Senate Bill 1 was kind of not long after that. Senate Bill 1 died, and then remember was resurrected and passed on the floor within about an hour. And so at that point, there's no time for anybody to read it or recognize all the various little things that are in there. But it is just a KTRS, and it's what it is there are two different systems. KTRS gets a general fund subsidy. It's a big amount of money, and it just kind of covers, here's what K-12 and universities pay, here's the gap, and it covers the gap. So they will continue to pay the gap for K-12, but after 2020, they will not continue to pay the gap for universities.
And the real rate's double.
Ann will have to answer the effect of that. We're not sure.
I'll tell you that over the last few years, I thought this is strange math to me. The KERS rate kept going up as we brought to you, and the proposal that it go to 83%. And yet we were paying, I don't know if it's 16, 17% basically on KTRS. And we've heard that there's an unfunded liability in both of them, both programs. And I thought, why is our KTRS rate not going up? And that was the answer. They had been subsidizing it directly into KT, as I couldn't figure out why we weren't seeing a comparable increase in both of them for the unfunded liability. So my understanding, Robin, is that this allows us to have the KTRS rate for this biennium. But the next legislative session, the pension issues will be front and center again. That's where we should see anticipate a very large increase.
And Dr. Ernst, I would say that one of the we spoke with the bill the Senate A&R chair, who's not the drafter of this pension legislation, but there was a lot of interconnected legislation. Very wacky kind of, just lots of stuff that was moving all at once, and then suddenly it wasn't moving, and then all of a sudden it was all passed. But we met with the Senate A&R chair and talked to him about this specific provision. And again, sometimes they say, well, we're going to deal with that next time. So I really think the effect of pension stuff for universities and what they did here is we're going to push this down the road another year. We're going to push this down the road another 2 years. We've got the biennium to work with you and figure something out. So I think that's I think that's where we are. I have the commitment of those folks, the Senate and our chair. The bill sponsor of the pension bill won't be there. Joe Bowen, he is not running again, but we've got some time to work on that. Just don't know what a solution is going to look like. But for us, we have to begin to plan, and that gives us some sense of what we're looking at. Yes,
I know you knew I was going to ask a question. Actually, it's more of a comment. I think we all should recognize as we talk about these pension liabilities that are going forward, and whether they address now or whatever, we need to really know where the rubber's going to hit the road. It's going to be in tuition increases. And these are not things that we're deciding today. These are decisions that are being made for us on being able to deliver a value proposition to a student to be able to get higher education. And we need to remember this as we elect our officials and we communicate with our officials that this needs to be addressed, and it doesn't need to be passed on to a tax to a student, as the form of an increase of tuition. And I think that we should do everything that we can to support our legislators to get this thing corrected. Right now, it's a smoking gun all the time. And maybe we're not doing enough as collectively to communicate with those legislators to say, now's the time, we've got to get this done. So that's fine.
I do have a question. I guess it could be more related to CPE. But is there, I guess, any stop that is foreseeable in the future about further reductions? Because I know they're, the models that they've given us have reduced it to around 27% for what's actually being funded by the state per student. And I guess, is there a time when that could foreseeably be zero or like in the teens?
I wish I could tell you that. Obviously, what the state decides to do, usually they figure out what they need to fund, how much they have, and then what they're going to devote that to. And we tend to fall, below K-12 education, so K-12 is going to get funded. I think I might direct that a little bit more on the performance funding model, because I think maybe that's where the question is. The case we've tried to make is that no state has been successful paying their way to performance funding. And the performance funding model was never intended to be used for, as cut the base of everybody and then put part of it back in. I mean, it kept about 25 million in higher ed funding and put it in the general fund. So we got about 31 million back of the total that they cut. And I say we, I mean higher ed. So 31 will go back of about 55, 54, 31 will go back into the performance funding model. The problem with that is that we had to lose money to get money back. Some institutions won't get money back. And so we'll continue to struggle. Andy, we will continue to struggle as a state. We will continue to struggle as institutions of higher education until we reverse that trend. And I've been doing this business for 18 years for WKU. And in more than half of those, we have been in cut mode, not in addition. So it's been a challenge. And I do not foresee any time in the near future when we reverse that trend.
Thank you.
Can I go back to one thing? And I know it's a win for the university to be cut on being able to take classes at another university and tuition. But on the flip side, when we do have staff and I believe some faculty who take classes at the university, so it's disappointing for them. But also I'm concerned about some of the programs. I know in the doctoral program for education, there were several people enrolled in that program who worked at other universities and were taking classes here. And I don't know if that's going to have a negative impact, and I'm sure it'd be nominal. But
so I can't answer in any definitive, but when I keep kind of looking back over at Ann, I can't answer that in the definitive. Let me tell you what I think will likely happen. I think anybody who's in a current program will likely be grandfathered into a current program. I can't, and I think each institution collectively wants to discuss how to manage this. The real challenge will be the KCTCS, who's this whole thing was invented for the purpose of helping KCTCS get an educated workforce for teaching. That's why they did it back 25 years ago. So we'll have to deal with that, Tamla. We'll have to decide, and I think we want to kind of collectively decide how to address this. I know I've seen other institutions that have assured their campus that it won't affect your ability to come to our campus as our employee, and we will do the same.
I know, because I know the staff. I mean, when we as a group first heard this, we were very disappointed in that, and then we found out that it came from CPE. It was actually driven probably the universities themselves. Like, okay, that's interesting, but yeah, and understand.
The tuition waivers are, the tuition waivers are just a cost center for us. And I mean, the idea is everybody, groups of people should be able to come for free, which is great if they want to pay for it, right? So we've been trying to whittle away as many of the tuition waivers as we can. We've been able to move some things to last dollar in, so that instead of just you just come for free because you fit this bit, you fit this set of circumstances in your life. You can come for free. Well, we've been able to do some things that allow it to be a last dollar in, so you at least have to do Pell and all that stuff, and then we just pay the last dollar. I understand the concern there. It's a collective, and then I think each institution will have to decide how they want to handle both their own employees coming to their own institutions or their own employees going elsewhere. I don't know. I know the president's discussed a little bit, but I don't think any decisions have been made.
Yeah, I want to add to this. I mean, a win for the institution, clearly, by people who view this as a loss of a benefit. So it's kind of strange to say this is a win for the institution. And my question is, are there ways we can resurrect that by making agreements with our co-institutions within the state?
There are, and so I'll talk. There have been only very preliminary conversations around what the effect of this is. My sense is this gives us the ability to say to our employees, here's a benefit that we're going to offer to you, instead of us telling other institutions, here's a benefit you're going to give to our employees. And so it's a shift in the way, it gives us control over the way in which we can reward our own employees. It also allows us to create partnerships with other institutions that say, either capping it or this is the number of folks that we'll want. Because here's the example. Think about this in the context of the budget model we were just discussing. If we have a program where half of the students are paying zero in tuition, how viable is that program? Or how core is it? And how do those dollars flow? And so I think this will get us some more clarity. At the same time, we know we want to be good partners, both with our community college, our other institutions across the state, to grow our talent pool. And that's really important for the state. And so I have no doubt that the outcome of this will be that we will continue to have tuition remission available for our employees here and other institutions. And that we'll do that in a way that benefits those staff and faculty members.
Okay. Like one more comment because of that. It's my last one. But as a faculty member who's tenured, is of a great concern. And I just want to make you all aware of that we as an institution are sort of borderline competitive in the sense of the salaries we can pay. And having weaker tenure requirements does not help this recruiting effort of talent. And so there has been a great deal of concern on the faculty side in terms of how that will impact us. And as a final statement on this, I believe that if we have a program and we have students in the program, that we have an obligation by SACS that these students ought to graduate. So it's very difficult to actually shut down the program within whatever the days they give us, okay, because it has to be sort of phased out in some sense. And so I don't think the people who made this bill really understand how things work.
Hopefully we're all appreciative of the statement made by Provost Lee and our president with regards to that, which I think should go a long way toward allaying those anxieties, but your point's well made. It should be obvious to anyone that we have a very engaged board who is willing to have discussions that are very substantive, and we have a lot of different talent around this table, as we've seen again today. And certainly I hope that is obvious to everyone. And Robin, I guess I'm sort of cutting you off here. I think you've answered the questions, but I do want to, we have some calendar dates for everyone's attention here. And I want to suggest, particularly since we apparently have a little more ability to have a meeting with George in Washington, D.C. or wherever he may be next week, we may want to consider some gathering in July, whereas the budget process and the strategic plan have to be married at some point. It's almost like a double helix. So you got to find the amino acids to connect all those. But I think perhaps some time in July we could orchestrate a ensure the board, and the board will be the body that approves the budget and the strategic plan. And we do want the board to feel like they've had every opportunity to participate and have their stamp on that. And we've had that during the process. Every board member has been on at least one of those committees. But as we move toward the end of the process, I think we may need to inject a July meeting in there somewhere so people can kind of think about that, and maybe even later today or over the next week or two, give me some indication whether early July, mid-July, but certainly before our August retreat on August 2nd. So I'll ask people to think about that if they will. The lunch is ready out there. They need everyone at the student union on the 3rd floor no later than 1 o'clock. We will, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment, although Randy, the committee meetings, I don't even have to.
You don't need a motion to adjourn if all.
You know what? I'm gonna adjourn this for lunch.